Now, today I'll be showing you how to play against the England Gambit. Now, this gambit is very famous these days, and it's a very bad gambit actually for black if you are well prepared, but it can be very dubious if you are not. So, it's very important to understand these lines theoretically so that you are aware of what your opponent is trying to do. Hey chess lovers, welcome back to the Chessyard. This is dhairyabagga, and I'll be showing you firstly the game that I played 5 days back. Now this game was against the England Gambit, and then I'll take you through the lines as well because if you know the England Gambit very well, then there is no harms for white for sure. It is very much playable at any given situation. So let's begin with this. So I started off with d4 and the England Gambit starts off with e5. I don't know why this is even considered playing because you are giving away the free pawn in the center straight away, which is basically against the principles of chess. But well, gambits are all about fun and creating some new lines. So I took on the pawn. I accepted the gambit. Opponent goes with knight to c6, which is the idea is to attack the pawn in the center, which of course has been just taken. And now the gambit works when you basically try to defend this pawn, and I went through this line as well because I was aware how to play it. So I went with knight to f3 here, and if you see, white has got some serious advantage already, 1.6 as per the engine evaluation. And now after opponent plays queen to e7, which is the main line in the England Gambit, when you try to take the pawn, pressurize it again. Now it's attacked twice. So that is the a reason behind that why you want to basically attack the pawn continuously with the queen now. And in this position, I played bishop to f4. Now, my idea is to make sure that the pawn is defended. Meanwhile, I'm also developing a piece in the center. Now, this is always met with queen to b4 as a check. And if you see, white is 2.4 ahead here, and you might be thinking that why is this guy completely lost? Because a lot of stuff is happening. A pawn on b2 is hanging, the bishop on f4 is hanging, and in fact, the king on e1 is also hanging. So, since so much of stuff is already kind of trapped here, and opponent can definitely go forward and attack a lot of stuff. So the main line here is to bring back the bishop to d2. That's what I did in the game as well, which defends everything for the time being. If we see the best move as per the computer, it still says yes, get the bishop backwards to b2, d2. That's what happens. And now opponent will generally take on the pawn, which is kind of bad because now what all you need to do is develop the knight on c3 and you are good with it. There's nothing hanging. But what people do a mistake sometimes is try to put this bishop here onto c3. Now this is completely bad because you are trying to defend the rook and attack the queen, but the opponent can get the bishop active, which means now your bishop is pinned as well. And now if you try to defend the bishop some other way, maybe going up with the queen, again that's bad because you lose the rook, and then again this you cannot do much about it. Even if you take the bishop, opponent can take firstly the knight, and then can take the bishop as well later on with the knight hanging. So a lot of stuff goes around if you try to defend this situation in a wrong way. So here again, the best move is to take with the bishop, but then knight comes in, and suddenly you see there's lots of pressure on c2. Yes, you can defend with the knight, but then the knight hangs itself. So it's going to be bad for white if white is not prepared. But it's a simpler way of handling this. After pawn takes, you just develop the knight onto c3, which I did in the game as well. And now there are two main lines here. Opponent can come back with the knight onto b4, again pressurizing the c2 pawn, which can lead to a check as well as a fork from c2 with knight eventually taking the pawn, which would mean that you will have to give away the queen because there's no other way, because the king is trapped in by its own pieces as well. So king is trapped, and you can't do much if the knight comes in. If the bishop comes in, which is the best move, which didn't happen in the game, my opponent went in with the knight. So I'll first explain what if the bishop comes in, because this is more challenging here. You don't need to just move away a knight or add defenses, rather attack the queen. And once the queen sidesteps, you can push this backwards again by pushing the rook onto b3. Now, when the queen goes up, then you can start developing, and your knight is well defended now. If opponent takes, you can take back. The rook also defends the square, so not an issue at all. And only thing this helps is white develop in a better way. What happened in the game was my opponent came in with a knight to b4 instead. Now trying to fork my king and a rook, but then what will happen is there's no other way, and I'll have to take the knight with the queen, and opponent wins my queen for the knight, which is very nice if I fall for the trap. But now there's a very nice way to defend this pawn, which is knight coming to d4, which backwards defend this pawn, and now your pawn is solid. You don't need to worry about anything, but your opponent needs to worry about a rook coming to now b1 attacking the queen. So in this position, my opponent responds with a bishop to c5, which again is bad because it isn't doing anything, and all I can do is attack the queen simply. Queen goes back, and now I put my knight onto b5. In the England Gambit, you always try to put your knight either on b5 or d5, eventually targeting the c7 square, because you also prepare for a counter fork on the other side of the board, because the bishop hasn't developed, even the king side hasn't developed. You have a lot of chances of counter attacking as well. So there's a lot of venom in this line, and you can definitely go with a knight to b5, which I did as well in the game. And the only move which saves this fork and the queen at the same time, remember the queen is also hanging, you cannot leave your pieces like that, is to place your queen on a5, which my opponent did find. Now in this position, I respond with here playing e3, whereas the computer says you can just kick the knight backwards from here straight away. But I prefer playing e3 here first. My idea is to make sure my bishop is also active and defending the knight as well, which is also good. I am 5.6 ahead in the game. It's just about being development stage on itself. Now opponent plays pawn to c6, which attacks my knight. And in this position, I thought that okay, let me trade off the knight for the bishop, because I have a lead in development. I can probably win this game easy. So I went with a knight to d6. My idea is to trade off, which we did have, which does happen. And then I am plus 3.2 still. But as per the computer, there's one more good line here. Rather than defending my own knight, I can just move the knight away onto e4. What it does is attacks the bishop. It attacks, increase the attack on the knight as well. And remember, the knight cannot move because queen is hanging just behind. So even if the opponent does take the pawn, the knight with the pawn, you can first of all simply take the bishop out of the game. And now this knight is being attacked twice and it cannot be moved. So you can take it in the other move, in the next move. So if queen say just goes back, you can win the knight as well. And there's no threats happening now, and you are very much ahead in the game. So this is another line in the continuation which can always work. But I went with a clear, straightforward approach by giving a check and trading off the bishop at least. And then I just my opponent here moves knight takes the pawn. I can trade off the knight, but I thought I went for the trading itself. Actually, I thought in the game I would have put the rook here, but then opponent can take the knight, threaten my queen as well. So I didn't want to go into that line. I took on the knight first. Opponent takes back with the queen, and now I play c4. It's the best move as per the computer as well. And why so? Because you're blocking the queen's way out. So it's very important. If you see, lots of squares are already covered by white here. There are very less squares remaining for the queens. Queen is almost going to be trapped. This is also covered actually with the rook. So a lot of squares are covered, if you see here, and opponent doesn't have much choices. Even if queen goes back to say a6, you can simply push the pawn forward and eventually trap the queen. There are ideas of putting the rook onto a file as well, maybe just putting out the bishop and castling and then attacking. So I just went with c4 first. Opponent gets the knight out onto f6, but if you see here, white is already winning because a lot of development has already been done. Here I went with bishop to c3. My idea was just to maybe control more squares with the bishop as well, and then putting out my other bishop. It was a passive kind of a move in that situation of the game, so that's why computer is not very much happy with it. But then I put my rook onto b2, attacking the queen. Now queen takes the pawn here, which was the final blunder of the game. I took on the queen here with the bishop, and my opponent resigns. But if you see in the opening, I had a lot of advantage because I knew the lines here. I knew how to deal with it. There are just a couple of moves that you need to be aware of. And then you can simply play this gambit very well. You need to defend your pawn initially with the bishop and the knight, which are the most natural looking moves. And this will always be met with queen coming to b4 as a check. All you need to do again is get back with the bishop, and once queen takes the pawn, put your knight out onto c3. And if the bishop or the knight, whichever piece comes up, all you need to do is just put the rook in front of the queen. If knight comes in instead, and it's attacking this, so you just defend it with a knight to d4. So because you develop the knight early in the game defending the pawn, it is also used later on by putting it on d4, defending the c2 as well. And this is all about having a better development in the opening than your opponent, and then you can probably scale it through and enjoy a very pleasant position from white. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something on how to beat the England Gambit, how to face it, how to make sure that you're aware of the lines, and this helps you win a lot of games as well. Thanks for watching, and if you like the video, please do subscribe to the channel as well. And I shall see you tomorrow with some interesting and instructive content, like always. Thanks for your time. Take care. Bye bye.